In 1934, Marshall and the NAACP led a boycott of stores on Baltimore's Pennsylvania Avenue. Although they depended on black customers, the white owners of these shops flatly refused to hire any black workers. The boycott succeeded, but shopkeepers sued the NAACP. Marshall's Howard University mentor, Charles Houston, joined his protege in defending the suit. The two lawyers worked as a team. The judge not only ruled in favor of the NAACP, but congratulated Marshall and Houston on their effective presentation. For the next 2 years, Marshall worked as Houston's assistant, and they spent much of their time traveling from one southern courthouse to another as they filed lawsuits for black students and teachers.
Black teachers might have 60 students in a class and made $1,000 a year. White teachers would have 20 students in a class and make $3,000 a year. And it just wasn't fair. And I heard Thurgood Marshall plead that case when I was about 10 years old. I don't remember what he said, but I never will forget this tall, handsome man, good-looking man, getting up with no notes, holding the court spellbound, citing cases, and winning.
In late 1938, Charles Houston resigned as NAACP special counsel because of ill health. Marshall, 30 years old, replaced him. With his wife, he moved into a walk-up apartment in Harlem and took over Houston's desk.
Houston was a mentor of Marshall, encouraged Marshall to go into the activities that he did, supported Marshall's moving to the NAACP and becoming a lead attorney on innumerable cases, which led to the successes that the civil rights movement was able to achieve in the courts in the United States.
As chief counsel to the important civil rights organization, Marshall had become Black America's most prominent attorney. Marshall next moved to the crucial area of voting rights. The 15th Amendment, ratified in 1870, gave black men the right to vote. Still another means, perhaps the most effective, of preventing blacks from voting was the white primary.
In order to maintain control of the government, the Democrats separated their party, made sure that no blacks could participate in it. The way they did that was to exclude African Americans from the primary system. The primaries were the only place where it made a difference whether you voted or not. And so by maintaining a white primary, the Democrats effectively excluded African Americans from effective participation in voting.
In 1944, Marshall attacked the white primary, starting in Texas. When black Texan Lonnie Smith tried to vote in the Texas primary election, he was turned away. He filed suit, but it was dismissed. Marshall took the case to the Supreme Court, and with only one dissenting vote, the court favored Marshall, making discrimination in primary elections illegal. Marshall went on to win another case, ruling segregation illegal on interstate buses. It was a breakthrough that would eventually lead to the end of Jim Crow transportation in America. The year 1946 also brought Marshall the NAACP's highest award, the Spingarn Medal. Now one of the nation's best-known lawyers, he had also become one of its most powerful crusaders for social justice. Thurgood Marshall's next major case was Briggs versus Elliott. Marshall's argument was that black schools were unequal to white schools and that they could never be equal unless they were integrated. Marshall lost the case. After a series of delays, the Supreme Court finally agreed to hear the Briggs case, along with 4 other NAACP segregation suits. Titled Brown versus the Board of Education of Topeka, the consolidated appeals went before the Supreme Court on December 9, 1952. After 3 days of intense arguments, the Supreme Court justices retired to consider what they had heard. The decision crowned half a lifetime of dedicated labor. His happiness, however, was soon shadowed by sorrow. Shortly after the decision, Vivian Marshall told her husband she was dying of cancer. Vivian Marshall died in February 1955. Within the year, the 47-year-old Marshall began courting Hawaiian-born Cecilia Suyet. They married in December 1955. In February 1956, Marshall called a meeting of Southern civil rights lawyers in Atlanta, Georgia. After hearing reports on the lack of progress in local school integration, he called for ongoing pressure on a case-by-case basis. The lawsuits that followed inspired not only complex legal maneuvering, but hostility, boycotts, and sometimes rioting that required armed intervention. By far, the most violent resistance to integration took place in Little Rock, Arkansas. The school board had prepared to admit black students to the city's Central High School in the fall of 1957. Unwilling to give up, Faubus ordered the state's racially mixed public schools closed.
It is not the duty of the local authorities, nor is it the duty of state authorities to enforce federal laws or federal court orders.
Marshall appealed to the Supreme Court, which declared Faubus's action unconstitutional. Finally, by fall 1959, Little Rock's black and white children began their school year together and in peace. During the next few years, Marshall engaged in seemingly unending combat, defending integration in Louisiana, Alabama, Virginia, South Carolina, and Texas.
There is no longer a case involving a single Negro student. It is a case of whether the law and the courts of the land...
At the same time, the bus seat issue had become national news. Rosa Parks, a 43-year-old black seamstress in Montgomery, Alabama, refused to give up her bus seat to a white passenger. Parks' arrest led to a black boycott of Montgomery's buses that lasted for more than a year. Organizing the boycott was Martin Luther King, Jr., a 26-year-old black Montgomery clergyman who soon became one of the 20th century's most influential black leaders.
We are not going back to the buses bragging about a victory being won. It is a position in which we can well map out the strategy for the future of integration.
In September 1961, 8 months after John F. Kennedy took office as the 35th President of the United States, he nominated Thurgood Marshall for a judgeship on the Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit. In 1961, the Senate Judiciary Committee's members included its chairman, Mississippi's ultra-conservative James O. Eastland, several other Southern Democrats, and a few conservative Republicans. They subjected Marshall to a trial by fire, cross-examining him ferociously and dragging out his confirmation hearings for almost a year. Unflappable as always, Marshall endured the ordeal without impatience or apparent loss of temper. Marshall took his seat on the federal bench in September 1962. In 4 years, not one of Marshall's 98 majority opinions was reversed by the Supreme Court, a remarkable record for a circuit court judge. That record did not go unnoticed. In July 1965, President Lyndon B. Johnson invited Marshall to Washington to talk about a new job: United States Solicitor General, the third highest legal position in the land. The U.S. Solicitor General represents the United States before the Supreme Court. This official directs all cases in which the United States government has an interest and argues the most important cases personally. In persuading the Supreme Court to rule school segregation unconstitutional, Marshall scored a tremendous victory. But Brown changed the social climate of the nation, paving the way for laws that prohibited discrimination in housing, employment, public facilities, and the armed services. By employing legal and peaceful means to advance blacks both politically and socially, Marshall has not only made an immense contribution to all Americans, but to the foundation of American justice itself.